Hi, everybody. How are you all doing today? My name is Brittany, and I will be your studio host for today's live demo. We are joined by the artist Jun-Pierre. He will be doing a watercolor figure for us today. I'm just going to give you guys a little bit of rundown of how the chat and stuff works if you are new to the demos. If you're not new, hi again. Thanks for coming back. So if you have a question, don't be shy, go on ahead and ask it. We're just gonna make sure that you, excuse me, type it in all capital letters so I can easily defer it from a comment. We also do a Q&A session at the very end. So any questions that you might ask that aren't really relevant to what June might be doing in the meantime, I'll ask it later during the Q&A session. Also, I'll be dropping some links for you guys to check out in the chat. So be sure to look there every once in a while. June will be doing a mini workshop with us coming up on May 21st, and that one will also be about figures. Without further ado, I'll let June take over.
Thank you, Brittany, and thanks everybody for joining. So welcome. I am really excited to be doing this particular workshop on painting the figure. Painting the figure is always one of the, let's say, most interesting, but maybe a little bit challenging subjects to paint, just in general, not just in watercolor, but yeah, really in general. So what I wanted to do today is share how I approach painting the figure and maybe give you some tips along the way and just different things to think about when you're painting the figure. So just real quickly, a little bit about myself. I'm a painter based in Nice, France. I have been doing and teaching watercolor for about 12 years now. And it's my favorite medium. Whenever I travel, I always have my sketchbook and my watercolors to try to capture everything. So I hope that today I could kind of expound and show a little bit more about why watercolor is such a great and versatile medium, even for just painting the figure. So I think what I'll do is I'll just jump right in. Because it's going to take a few layers. The way I'm going to be painting the figure today, it will be in a layered way. So there's going to be different steps to it, let's say. All right, so I have a drawing which is based on the figure, the photo reference image that I believe if you want to see, you could see that'll probably be in the chat.
Yeah, I just dropped it actually.
Oh, okay, sweet. All right, so I did this drawing. It's based on a photograph I found on a site called Quickposescom. I can write that down. So yeah, Quick Poses is great for artists that want to try to do like reference studies of figures and dynamic poses. They do this thing where they generate all kinds of different figures and costumes, some that are clothes, some that aren't, and you're able to get ideas and you can do gesture drawings. It's really nice. So I will often go there for like class, like, if I want to do a class or figure study around the figure. So quickposes.com, and then I have I laid out the drawing itself for the figure. Now, the question might be, well, how do I go about drawing the figure? And we're not going to be focusing on that so much today. I will go into that a little bit later during a class that I do with Arte later. But as far as just drawing the figure, there are different ways that you can approach it. just a few things that I'd like to bring up is that, you know, with the figure, you have a frame, which is of course the paper itself. And you want to sort of place the figure in such a way where it kind of fits compositionally, the positive space and also the negative space around the figure are, you know, in a way complementary, or they balance each other out. So for example, you know, if I have a window or a frame, I should say, you know, if I have my figure, maybe instead of it being just like kind of like up in the corner, or if it's, you know, off to the side, I'll try to sort of frame it in a way where I have a balance between the positive subject and the negative space around it. Another approach as far as, let's say, drawing the figure is just to try to get the mass shapes. So for me, there's a figure, there's the back, there is this sheet covering her, and then, you know, this kind of a, almost like an L shape. So I'll try to just like loosely lay that in and then go back over it to get, again, to define the contours with looking at the negative space. There's also a grid. You could grid out your drawing. If any of you saw the Sarah Stokes demo, which I think was it was last week. She does a portrait and of a face, and to lay it down, she also used a grid technique. So that's literally, you'd like print out the piece of paper or the photo, and then you put a grid on it, and then you would draw a grid on your paper, and then sort of transfer almost box by box where the figure is. That's another technique if you'd like to try this, as far as just transferring from the photo reference. So now that I got my drawing done, I try not to make the drawing too heavy, meaning I'm not going to do any shading now in this let's say moment, or in this stage. For example, the hair is going to be dark, but what I'm going to do is just leave the hair just outlined more or less. And shadow areas, like for example here, they're more outlined than anything, because I don't want there to be too much, let's say, I don't want the drawing to get too dark, to be too much graphite or dust on the page itself, mixing with my colors. So I'm going to be doing this painting with basically a primary color palette, and I'm going to be focusing mainly with the colors of, I have this palette here, and there's a lot of different colors, but I'm pretty much just going to focus on using the primary colors, so red, yellow, and blue. So I'm just using, this is like cadmium yellow, and this is lemon yellow. I'm basically just kind of going back and forth between the two. Here's sort of like a bright red or cadmium red. And then I have a, say, ultramarine blue. So between these three colors, I'm going to try to create my color wheel. And then within the colors, I'll also mix them a lot as well, using all three. So by the color wheel, what I mean is, of course, you know, I'll drop in and just make, you know, your standard color mixture. And this is always helpful to do for me, even if I'm doing the figure, because it kind of enables me to see what colors I might play off of one another, and how I can generate all of these, let's say, all of these potential color mixes just with those three, just with the cadmium yellow, cadmium red, and ultramarine blue. I'm also going to throw in a burnt sienna as well. So I got my burnt sienna. that's going to act to help to darken some of the colors. But what I want to consider is, of course, there's the color of the figure's, the skin tone. And as a way to approach just moving through the image, I'm going to think tonally. So by tonally, I mean from light to dark. So I'll think how I can deconstruct my figure in the painting in basically four tones. So by that, I mean, so here I have my light. And then for my dark, let's just say that you have like black. And then in between the two, you have different shades of gray. So here's, for example, a light gray. And here's more of a middle to dark gray. So you have these jumps from really bright light to, let's say, light gray, not so dark really. Here, middle tones into shadow tones, and then here it's just like really the darkest areas. Now you could do a painting with just these tones, meaning just you could choose one color, like you could take black, or you could take ultramarine blue, or you could take viridian green, and then you could do the entire study just using this tonal, this tonal arrangement of this light to shadow, light to dark. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to see how I could use the primary colors and essentially try to, using this idea of like 4 established tones, one being paper white and the other being dark, really, almost black. And then just having like 2 middles in between, one light and one a little bit darker. And so by simplifying it down to those 4 tones, it'll really help for me to approach a figure that has, if you think about it, like almost an infinite range of tones and colors. Like there's this wide range of tonalities. So it just basically simplifies it. And I think that's really important, especially when you're dealing with something that's from nature, like the figure or landscape, because in a way, what we're doing as painters is we're trying to translate what we see, the world around us, a figure, a portrait, a landscape, whatever, onto something that's on your piece of paper, that's done with just pigments, watercolor, or oil paint or acrylic or whatever it might be. You're basically translating. We're translators in a way. So I would like to translate using my 3-color palette of red, yellow, and blue, these different simple tones. And so I use this tonal spectrum of light from light to dark as a guide. It's like my guide to see how I can mix the colors. So I'm going to just so let's say I got my different, you can see that I'm just trying to fit. It's always tricky with these Zoom lessons to see if everything is fitting within the screen.
I can see what you're doing.
Awesome. All right, Brittany, you're my eyes and ears. The best. Okay, so what I'm doing here is basically I'm doing the color wheel, but I'm doing it here on my palette, and that's important because I got this in the back of my mind, the color wheel, but I want to, instead of just going around the wheel, like red to yellow makes orange, yellow to blue makes green, blue to red makes purple. Of course, we know that. That's pretty straightforward. What I want to do is I want to mix all 3. I want to see what happens if we go with tertiary colors. So I'm mixing yellow, red, and a little bit of blue. And what am I going to get here is something like this, a little bit more like that. Now, of course, it's all about ingredients and it's all about percentages and so on. So if I add just a little bit more, let's say if I make more of a stronger orange between the red and the yellow, and then I add just like a touch of blue, then maybe my result is a little bit more almost like pink, right? And if I vice versa, if I maybe make a stronger purple between the purple and between the blue and the red, so it's a more of a blue dominant color, and then I just like a touch of yellow, we get this kind of grayish blue tertiary color. And so when you're mixing between all three of these colors, I know this is basically like, you know, your color theory, color theory 101. But when you're dealing with just these three colors and you're putting all three of them together, what you end up getting are this beautiful arrangement of like natural colors, you know, earth tones, flesh tones, you know, whether it's somebody who has color, more of, let's say rosy colored skin, versus somebody who has more olive colored skin, caramel colored, you know, like all of these beautiful colors that you might see in skin tones, you can achieve that with just your basic red, yellow, blue primary color palette. So you also notice how I deliberately mixed the tonality. So they're basically like along that, they're about the same tonally as this, sort of like a light gray. Right? They're like kind of a light gray. Maybe this one's a little bit darker, but I try to think about how I'm also thinking how light or how dark the colors might be. So for example, if I want to go a little bit heavier, meaning a little bit darker, see, that's closer to this. I want to do that again, but maybe with a warmer color. So I'm mixing again, I'm mixing all three, and this is pretty warm. That's more like the third tone there. And this one, I'll make it a little bit more yellow dominant. And we got this. Okay, so I would always be sort of thinking about that, especially as I'm layering over the painting and over the figure. Okay, so with that kind of in play and sort of in the background, I want to think about that, how I deconstruct approaching this figure. So what I'll do first is just isolate where are the whites, where are like the bright whites, because of course, that's one of the colors, or let's say tonalities in this spectrum. And the entire paper is white to start from. So how do I go through and sort of isolate those areas? So what I do is I'll start with the next level up of tonality, this sort of like light gray area. And I'm going to see where I could find that throughout the figure. And I'm going to just go ahead and start with establishing that first. So what I like to do very often is move through my my colors during a given wash. So what I mean by a wash is I'm going to do a passage of a color, like a field of color, and then as I'm doing that field of color, I will be sort of maybe mixing some other colors inside. But my primary color will be this sort of like orange, yellow orange color right here. Okay, so I'm gonna start, and usually how I start is I'll kind of go in an area that's maybe just to kind of test it, and then I'll start going in and trying to isolate where the lightest lights are. And I know that, for example, her hair is really dark, but I will just, I'll just go ahead and paint right into that.
Why do you do that?
Because I'm going to eventually overlap because I'm going to be doing, since I'm doing this sort of layered technique,
Mm-hmm.
and as I'm doing a layered technique, because I'm going light from light to dark. If there's some of these lighter tones underneath, it's okay. It'll just sort of be sort of integrated into the next layers of wash I do.
Okay.
So what I meant by like dropping in colors, maybe I have this general color here. Maybe what I'll do is I'll drop in some of these other colors, a little cooler colors to augment and kind of tint the wash that this initial light wash that I'm doing. Also, it's pretty stark, the white right there. So what I'm going to do is I could take this brush, and what I do is I'll sometimes just dry it off a little bit with a paper towel. And with that slightly clean brush, I could spread or dissolve the pigment into the white. So there's sort of like a more of a gradation from a bright white of the paper into that light tone, right? So it's not as stark. It's not as stark of a transition from the white of the paper to that tone that is painted, unless you want to have a stark transition, as I do, like right there, like right here to here. I want there to be this nice kind of crisp edge, because of course this is the fabric and this is the skin tone.
We got a comment that I think other people might benefit from. They said, it's always difficult for me to not overwork it at this point even. Before I know it, everything is this value and there's no whites left on the paper.
Oh, I feel you, whoever that said that.
Sam Goss, I think that's how you say it.
I feel you, Sam. Well, I would say the pencil drawing stage is helpful, because I do a lot of, let's say, like, I don't know, prep work. Let's put it that way. I'll do a lot of prep work in the pencil drawing, where I'm not drawing for the drawing, I'm drawing for the painting. And so what I mean by that is I'll almost like make highlights or note where I'm going to just leave spaces white, leave spaces paper white, because of that very concept of it's easy to sort of go paint crazy and just paint right over it. But if you're just mindful of I think, like, again, like having the four clear tonal breakdowns, you kind of think about, okay, this is one passage that I'm going to do. I'm going to just focus on this for now. And then once that's sort of settled and established, then you could just regroup and then kind of go back in and see just what needs to be slightly darkened, and then darken a little bit further. And so, so that's how I approach it. I just kind of try to force myself to preserve the pure or the true areas of white,
Mm-hmm.
and not to get, and then just to kind of keep it moving, just keep moving forward.
Yeah, I think that's something that just comes with practice too. Like, I still struggle with that as well.
Yeah. I think it's something that, like, you could be painting for years and years and years, and always that issue of like overdoing, or you're just knowing when to finish is like, it's almost like an eternal question.
Mm-hmm.
I'm gonna do a little blow dryer here just to speed things up a little bit. So
Okay, no worries. Since June is doing that, I'll take this time to let everybody know that we do weekly prizes to community members that tag us on Instagram or Facebook with #EtcherStudio. We will award one winner every week, and the prize will be different each time. Sometimes a mini workshop voucher, a sketchbook, an Etcher Lab product voucher. Who knows what you're going to receive? So I'll put that hashtag down in the chat for you guys, just in case you missed what I said there.
Could you hear the blow dryer when it went on, or does Zoom do that automatic? That's great.
Yeah, I couldn't hear it at all.
That's very cool.
Yeah, I love that feature.
Okay, I'm looking at the clock. Okay, so what I want to do now, and this is where the middle tones, I'm going to move now into middle tone territory, meaning kind of into the shadows. Also, I'm going to kind of in this area here, but a little bit darker than this, actually. This is where it often gets a little tricky because you're kind of, because this is now at this stage, I would say there's a nice sort of tinted drawing aspect to it, right? Like it's got you can see the line work. It's got a little bit of shadow. So it kind of works in a way at this stage. And so if you want to just do the figure like this, where it's essentially just sort of like a tinted pencil drawing, then definitely that can work, right? We're just like this little subtle tinting is sufficient. I'm going to go a couple of steps further, or a little bit deeper, to basically tint the entire painting. And so I want to show a little bit more contrast than just this. So this is I always find this one of the more difficult stages, to kind of like move it from just let's say a pencil wash or a pencil drawing with a wash on it, to something that's like, no, this is going to be a full-fledged painting in its own right. So I got some different tones. One's like warmer, a little bit more violet, and then a little bit greener, olivey green, more of like a blue dominant. And I'm going to, within this next middle tone wash, actually I might do one more just to a little bit more brighter red.
People are saying how just the simplicity of the way it is now is even just so beautiful.
Yeah, I'm not gonna lie, this is often like the scariest stage for me, where I'm just like, I kind of like the pencil drawing, like just the light wash. I just did a figure drawing session recently, and there were so many beautiful paintings that were done that were in that technique of like a pencil line or a pen line with just a wash on top. So by all means, like if that's how you would like to approach it, then go for it. I love it. I'm just gonna try to go a little bit more, and we'll just see what happens. You know, we're gonna have a little fun, just in case you want to see how that goes. So I'm going to go into the shadows. Another helpful thing, I have this piece of paper, not just for the demo, but I do it all the time, just to kind of see basically what colors I'm mixing. You know, it's one thing to see it on the palette, it's another thing to see it on the paper. So, okay, I can see what I want to do with my colors here. And now I'm going to go into, again, I like starting where I know it's not going to, I'm going to eventually kind of cover this up. So you don't have to do this, but I'm going to eventually move into the darkest area anyway. So I will start there because it's just the darkest area, of the photo, her hair. And I'm going to kind of use that to start my stroke. Also, again, I use another brush that is sort of like it helps to pull and soften the passage. So I'll use that to...
Does that one have water on it or just dry brush?
It doesn't have, it's wet. So it does have a little bit of water, but it's not like dripping with water. It's like, I would say it's imagine like I dipped it and then I knocked it off a few times on my paper towel. So you see when it gets, I'm thinking in color, but I'm not thinking explicitly like I want to get a green or I want to get an orange or pink or whatever. I think almost more like temperature wise, like I want to go warmer or I want to go cooler. If I think in terms of temperature, it's a little bit like thinking in terms of tonality of light and dark. It just simplifies. It's just helpful to simplify how I'm moving into the skin tones. Yeah, watercolor, because it's constantly moving and there's so many different stages. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I've had a paint with, the emotional journey that you go on in a watercolor over the course of a painting. I mean,
Yeah.
it is just like a rocky up and down journey sometimes, where after you do one little paint stroke or move, it's like, oh, this is great. I got this going on. Everything is working out just peaches. And then all of a sudden the next stroke, it's like, oh my God, what did I do? It's
I find that
over.
happens. I find that happens a lot in plein air because weather conditions come into play so much more.
Sure. Oh, I mean, yeah, with plein air, there's all of these factors that you have to consider. You have to consider just things like, wind or,
Humidity.
a bug flying into your painting. Yeah. But I mean, also just even if you're in your studio and doing as we're doing, just painting from a photograph from the computer screen, there are these on a microscopic level, like if you're really looking at the pigment as it settles on the page, there's a lot of activity going on, because of course it's wet and they're going to dry in a certain way. So that always it'll keep you on your toes as you're going through and expecting a wash to move a certain way, and it just doesn't. It might not do that, what you expect. So you guys could maybe see how I'm kind of alternating between the two brushes. Again, this is just essentially like a slightly damp brush that I use to sort of pull the color from the brush that actually has the pigment on it. If anybody has any questions and stuff, please feel free to throw them at me.
Yeah, don't be shy.
I tend, with these types of demos, I try not to actually see what's going on with you guys out there in the world, because it's a little bit too too distracting. But
we did get, I guess it's kind of a question. Someone was talking about white gouache, and when you're doing the highlights or blocking out the lights versus darks, do you ever use anything like that to do your white areas, or do you just try to block it out?
I tend not to use too much gouache in that area, just because it tends to, let's say, pop too much, especially when you're when you're painting with like such a transparent approach with these watercolors. A lot of times with the gouache, the thing is that you can get it to be quite bright and quite opaque, but it tends to, I find, still not be as bright as, let's say, the paper. So I try, if I want to have like a really bright area, like light white area, I'll tend to just pretty much keep it paper white.
You sometimes use masking fluid though, right?
Yep. Yeah. I'll sometimes use masking fluid. I like to use masking fluid for like almost like really fast natural effects. Like imagine if you have the ripples of water in a just like cresting in a stream. So I'll do like a really fast slash with masking fluid. Or I like to use masking fluid on a tone that's already colored. So let's say you want to do bright sunny grass, or like grass is an example. Like you might do a wash of yellow, then once that's dry, do masking fluid where the bright grass is, and then do another wash of like bluish green. And then when you lift off the masking fluid, when everything is dry, you get this really beautiful sort of like yellowy, crisp, clear line.
Mm-hmm. We got a couple more questions in the chat here.
Okay.
This one's kind of funny. I don't know how serious it is. June, do you stand or sit when you paint?
That's a good question. I will, like right now I'm standing. It depends on what I'm working on and where I am. So, you know, my preference is probably, well, I should stand more, but a lot of times it's just like it's not really possible. Mm-hmm. But like in my studio, for example, I have like right now I'm on my standing desk. If I'm doing these types of Zoom things, I'll tend to stand. But if I'm working on my, let's say like I do a lot of comics, comic book pages, I sit and I have sort of a drafting table, and so it has an incline on it.
Mm-hmm. Do you always do the tonal planning beforehand?
Well, yes, I guess I do. But it might not necessarily be as, how should I say, like, it might not be as sort of like literally laid out as we have here. But it will be kind of in my head, if that makes sense. It's almost like if you guys are cooking, sorry, I do a lot of cooking analogies. You kind of know, like you might have your ingredients laid out, and you might have an idea of like what kind of like how you might want to, let's say what you want in your pasta sauce, for example, if you're making like a homemade pasta sauce. And so you have your ingredients laid out and you kind of think, okay, I'm going to probably go a little heavier on this, but less that kind of thing. So I think it's a little bit like that with regards to color, for sure, like the palette. And also in a way with the tone work, when you're looking at your subject and you're thinking, okay, this is what I really want to make sure is clear and light. This is what I want to make sure is clear and dark, etc. Mm-hmm. Okay, so I'm now going to transition to the darks. So with the dark, if I really want to get dark, oops, I'll use this one. This one's kind of messy. If I really want to do dark, what I tend to do is I use a blue with, again, a burnt sienna. And so here's a burnt sienna, here's a blue. That's why I suggested using two in this lesson, because you can see it makes almost like a black. It's very, very dark. But what's great about it is that you can modulate between, let's say, a slightly cooler gray with more blue, or like more of a warmer gray by just adding more of the burnt sienna. So you have quite a range between the two. So I'll add that in with my 3-color palette. You don't really need to. You could probably just stick with the 3 colors and the 3 colors only. But I think just for well, when I'm painting, for myself, I'll often just add that burnt sienna, and just makes a huge difference. So all right, so I'm just going to mix these colors for the darker passages. And now with the darker passages, now what I'm doing is I'm starting to move into like a finalizing or strengthening of the shadows. So I'm making a mixture of darks here. One is going to be a little bit cooler, more like violet colored. One that's a little bit more reddish brown. And then maybe I'll make one that's a little bit almost like greenish. So a little yellow. And so just to show you one that might be a little bit more like that, sort of like this deep dark olivey green. One that's a little bit more, again, brownish, reddish brown. One that's more like violet blue. All right, andiamo, here we go. So first thing I'm gonna do is, again, I'm gonna go in the darkest areas. figure and kind of see the edge of her ear.
Do you tend to paint more from photos or like live models?
I prefer to paint from live models just because I think like with the live model, there's kind of there's other information that I have to consider, like how it all fits spatially. It's almost like when you're out painting a landscape, like there are so many other factors to think about, which I like. I think it kind of just increases the results, or like the different kinds of results you can get in the painting itself. But I've been painting a lot from photographs, especially since the pandemic started, and I've seen, or I guess I've really appreciated some of the things that you can do. You could sort of how you can find different photos and kind of collage different photos together. I like to do that. Like, for example, if there's a really interesting photo of a landscape, maybe I could use that with like a foreground subject and sort of combine them together. And that's been really, I'll do that a lot. So I'm pretty much just like going over my, let's say my first two tones plus let's say the white of the paper. And I'm sort of picking and choosing. I don't want to cover up too much. So to that earlier question by, I believe Sam, just like how much to cover or not. I try with every subsequent layer, I'm trying to sort of let the underlying layer that I just painted show through a bit. So I don't cover it all. I sort of just, what I'm trying to do is basically just to reinforce the last layer a bit further. And one thing that you think about all the time with watercolor, well, in painting in general, I think, but I'm going to say this also with watercolor, is edges and the play of edges. And the edges is really important because, for example, if you have a soft edge on a figure, when I say edge, I mean like kind of how the tone will transition from a dark to a light. If it's a soft transition on the figure, then usually that will suggest that there's sort of a more like muscle or softer part of the body that's underneath, right? So for example, on the upper arm here, it's sort of I want to suggest it's more of a cylinder. But then as we get to down by the elbow, where the skin is closer to bone, it's going to be a kind of a faster, sharper plane change there. So I'll go and try to make more of an edge there to show that plane change from a, like the muscle to the bone of the elbow.
We got a question that I think would be cool to find out from you. For each successful painting, how many do you screw up or ruin or just trash it?
I love that question. That's That's hard to say because, yeah, definitely. Like, let's say I did a painting tomorrow and it worked pretty well. And I'm like, okay, I did that in one go. That was cool. I did that in one shot. But I didn't really because, of course, I learned a lot of the stuff like to actually execute that painting, in a lot of let's say bumbled, failed paintings or sketches along the way, like that are kind of in the history books. If I look through my sketchbooks, like, it's funny, I think when people have sketchbooks and if they collect sketchbooks or if they draw on them regularly, there's the pages, the pages that are like their all-star pages, like the pages that if they're ever showing off their sketchbook to someone, they're like, oh, wait till they see that one page. Oh, that page is good. Yeah. And then, but then there's the vice versa, then there are the pages where you're like, oh my God, I hope they do not see that other page. But when I go through some of my sketchbooks, a lot of times I'm like, wow, there's no way I would have gotten to this, like this one drawing I'm proud of if I hadn't done like these like first 4 pages before ahead of it. Like quite literally, like you'll see the progression in the sketches. And so all that to say, I think for a given painting, like one given painting, like if I'm working on like a particular idea, let's say it's like a portrait, I want to do a portrait, like I'll try to mitigate as much as possible how many times I might have to redo it. So I'll do a fair amount of prep. So hopefully I do it in like one shot, I'll try to do it, and that's the aim, but if it doesn't work out, or if I just don't finish it or scrap it, then I guess I figure I keep it, and I feel like eventually I'll get around to maybe liking it or being glad that I did it. Like I'll sort of just be forgiving with it, because I've just dealt with so many times in the past where like those botched attempts have actually really served the purpose. Like just straight up, they've been helpful and I've learned something from them. I just wanted to mention here, because I'm working on the feet, and she actually has these kind of like these, I guess they're ballet shoes. I don't know, do ballet shoes have a name? Do you guys know?
I used to just call them, like, I actually did ballet when I was very young, and I used to just call them my like slippers, like ballet slippers. But there's probably an official name for them.
Okay, cool. Well, it looks like she's got these ballet slippers on. And I think I'm just going to simplify them as much as possible, because yeah, I don't want that to be so much the focus. But what I might do is just add like a little bit of suggestion of that, like the lace that's there.
Mm-hmm. Are you still just using those 2 brushes, or do you have a third now?
Actually, yeah, so this was my main brush to put stuff on. This is sort of the one to pull. And now, because I'm doing a little bit more detail work, it's a slightly thinner brush.
And those are the etcher brushes, right?
Yes, they are. Okay, so now I pretty much am going to, I have most of the figure is down. I wouldn't say that I'm like done, because what I want to do is now consider how to work into and around the rest of the figure, especially, in the shadows and the sort of grounding the figure in the frame. So what I do here in these passages is, well, I'll talk about the fabric. I try to sort of reinforce slightly some of the folds, but I don't go too heavy into it. Fabric is a great way to study if you're ever like painting fabric. I think it's a great way to think about as like a landscape. Like think about valleys and peaks of hills and so on. So you want to kind of keep some of those light tones. You don't want to cover them up, but you just, you also want to sort of make them, some of them a little bit darker, reinforce them a little bit more. And then I will throw, or I should say like kind of launch cast shadows from the figure. And this helps to place the figure in space. So I'm mixing pretty much mainly a blue and with a little bit of burnt sienna. And when it comes to cast shadows, I always try to think again about the edges, because the edges will help to, let's say, show how close to the figure the shadow is. So if it's right off of the figure, it'll be very crisp. And as it moves away, it sort of dissolves and gets softer along the edge. And cast shadows right sort of right where there's contact with the surface, they're usually quite dark. So I try to make sure that I have a sort of dark line and then it sort of blurs out.
Oh, wow, that shadow really makes a difference. I looked away for like a second monitoring the chat, and then I looked back and it was like a whole new painting.
Yeah, it really kind of like, instead of it just being, let's say, a sort of random figure study on a page, it sort of becomes much more of like a painting, I should say. But of course, I still have, so now that I have the darks and stuff down, I have a little bit more time. So what I'm thinking I'm going to do is I want to sort of come up against the light edge on the back of her, or basically on the right part of her back, the high part of her back. And so I think what I'll do is I'll mix a bluish color, pale blue. And this is a way to pull the figure forward, another way to pull the figure forward. And whenever I do a stroke in a line, what I'll do is so there's one side of my stroke that is the, let's say, the edge of her back. And then the other side of the stroke, I want to try to dissolve into the mass of the background. So what I'll do is I'll sort of pull the other edge out. And of course, that goes the same with the sheet.
We got about 5 minutes left.
Okay.
I'm going to start asking you some questions that I saved for the Q&A, if that's okay.
Sure.
So how do you know how much water to put? It's a question I see a lot.
As in water to put?
Sorry,
okay,
like
well,
in your brush, like when you're mixing colors, they were just like, how do you figure out how much water to use?
Right. I think it depends on how much ground I want to cover within a given stroke. So like right now, I want to cover a fair amount of grounds because I'm doing this sort of this wash around the figure, right? So I have a pretty saturated brush, and that will allow me to facilitate moving the color around to a lot of space, to cover a lot of space. But if I'm doing more of let's say detail work, or just like kind of like get moving in on details. I don't really want to have too much water on the brush because it might flood out of the brush and cause some issues, right? So I try to, if that's the case, what I'll do is I'll like dip it up against the jar, the lid of the, or the edge of the jar, or I'll like even knock it off with a paper towel.
Mm-hmm. Let's see here. Do you have any recommended palettes, limited palettes for figure painting?
Yeah, I would say, so the palette that I worked with, I think you could do, which is basically red, yellow, blue with burnt sienna. You could also do just straight burnt sienna, yellow, ochre, and ultramarine blue. Those three, I think, would work really well. You can do just two colors, like a warm and a cool. Like if you have a something that's closest to the warmest area of the color wheel, which is maybe like a cadmium orange, or a burnt sienna would actually work fine, and a blue, cobalt blue, ultramarine blue, and then you're able to have the warms and the cools, and then between the two, if you mix the blue and the burnt sienna together, again, you get this like, you can get a very dark gray. So those are pretty minimal, simple palettes that I think will be good starts. But to be honest with you, like if you can have two contrasting colors, so like a red and a green, like a alizarin crimson and a viridian, and playing those two off of each other, you'll also have like a crazy amount of contrast and color mixtures that could work really well. If you have any version of the primary colors, like a red, a yellow, and a blue, then you can make so many different colors. Like it's just limitless how many colors you can make. So
follow-up question to that. Would they be the same color combos to use for people with darker skin tones?
Yeah. I mean, it's just a matter of, again, like percentages, how much of each color you might want to. I mean, you can just get so many different colors from just a limited palette of red, yellow, and blue.
Right.
So it's really like how it's a combination. Like how much of whatever color, like maybe some people might lean more towards like a redder skin tone. Mm-hmm. Some people might lean a little bit more into more like a olivey skin tone, right? So you just like might lean more into blue, into red, into yellow.
Mm-hmm.
By the way, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
I'm doing like I did a spraying a little bit to dissolve the edge there. And now I have a little bit of, let's say, wet thing that's happening here. So that could be fun, especially if you have an image that is pretty, like, it's just, there it is. It's just on the page. It's pretty, it's not super colorful, or it's almost kind of neutral. I might use this opportunity with the mist of water that's down to like lightly introduce some other colors, some other little touches here and there. And because it's misted, the water will start to dissolve and spread a little bit. And yeah, other than that, I think I would just try to find a way to make sure that everything feels balanced, that there's like the colors, like the warmth to the cool, the composition, everything feels pretty much like set, and then just walk away. Like seriously, just like don't do too much more, because in the end, you never know if you overwork it. And as I say that, I'm like, okay, I'm gonna just add a little bit more here.
I was just gonna say.
Yeah, it's seriously like one of the hardest things but I just want to warm it up a little bit.
Mm-hmm. Do you have in mind how dark you want to go beforehand?
Regarding the photo versus the subject, or just in general in terms of the photo, because you have a photo in front of you, you have this reference. You have this reference of how dark it could be, and so that's always something to react to. So if I have a photo, if I'm painting from a photo, then inevitably I kind of say, okay, well, it could go that dark or that light, right? Like that's my reference right there. But if I'm thinking, you know, I want to do something really soft and sort of misty, and then I kind of prepare and imagine like, okay, I'm not going to really go that dark and heavy, and maybe I'll just go up to the point where it was like after like the second pass, or even the first pass, you know, like a pencil line and a wash. And I'll be like, yeah, that's what I was going for. That's, you know, I didn't want it to be too worked in. I didn't want it to be too dark. So it's a little bit of like, I guess it's planning, I guess it's preparation, but it's also just intent. What do I want it to look like? What's my mood today as I'm doing this painting? You know, especially if you're doing figure painting, whether it's with a model who is just, you know, has, let's say, a 15-minute pose or an hour-long pose, you know, a lot of times it's just the time will dictate how much you work into it. Even if you're doing urban sketching and you're drawing somebody in front of you that's on the street or in a cafe or something like that, yeah, you might just be like, okay, I don't have much time to work on this figure. I'm just going to see how much I can do within this amount of time. But if you're working from a photograph, or if you think like, okay, I want to get to a certain point, you know, if you have these, let's say these steps, or at least like this path of, I have the brightest lights, middle tones, and then the darks, I'm going to just kind of walk along this path. And then by the time I get to the darks, I'm pretty much there. And then I just might need to tweak a little bit, tweak some of the lights, tweak some of the darks, maybe the colors, maybe make some of the color a little bit brighter, but you're like pretty much there. So I think that's a good place. It's a good way to approach if you don't really know where to end with the figure, to just try in this way, where you are basically breaking down the figures in tonalities from light to shadow.
Great answer.
Thanks. So I think, I think I'm pretty much wrapped up with this. I don't know if you have.
Yeah, it looks great.
You probably have a.
We just have a couple more questions. So if you don't mind,
Sure.
I'll just get to those. Sorry, I'm just trying to filter through which ones I've gone through already. Do you draw portraits too? Do you work them like you do the poses? I'm not sure what they meant by the second part of that question, but.
Yes, I do. I do portraits too. In fact, I would say like my origin story with art was with not portraits exactly, but caricatures. I used to do caricatures at my town fair when I was a kid, and I love doing portraits. As far as watercolor, I do approach it more or less in this way, which is I try to break it down tonally. I think of the palette ahead of time. And just like the figure itself, I mean, like the body, I would say portraits, you know, you have this issue of there are rounder areas, there more angular, sharper areas. So how you think about sort of the head or the face is like a simple form, you know, the nose, the lips, all of that. That's, you know, you have, yeah, it's just as complex as doing an entire body just to do a portrait, but it's so much fun. I love doing portraits.
Awesome. Just one more question, I think. So now that you're a lot more experienced with time, I guess, has your prep changed at all since before?
I'm sorry, what changed?
Your prep, like when you prep to do a drawing or something like that, has it changed a lot since you've gained more experience?
Yeah, I think so as far as the prep, I kind of know the colors, or at least I have a feeling of what colors will work, what colors will capture the particular scene or subject now. So I don't necessarily need to paint them out to see what they'll look like. I kind of know what they will do. So in a way, I try to be as direct and immediate as possible. So I try not to overwork the pencil sketch too much. I want to have a good drawing, because if you have I think the more secure you are in your drawing, or I shouldn't say in general, for me, the more secure I am in the drawing as it's laid out on the page, the more, let's say, like direct and maybe loose and expressive I could be with my paint. So I try to have a drawing that feels like a good anchor, and then I could sort of like play around with in the painting stage. So as far as the prep work with that, I guess I just think about how to just how to render it as clearly as I can, and if I feel confident with my drawing, that really does a lot of work. And I think back in the day when I was younger, when I was newer to watercolor, I think I would skip that drawing part more, and that would mean I'd have to do a lot of work and catch up in the painting stage, and that would be just often very stressful and anxiety ridden. So I realized, like, actually, if I do that more of that in the drawing phase, I won't have to freak out as much when I'm working with this live paint.
Sure. All right. Well, thank you so much, June. This is such a good lesson.
No problem. Thank you.
People in the comments throughout the whole thing, people are saying that they love your teaching style and your approach to everything.
Thank you, guys.
If you wanted to learn more from June, I dropped a link earlier for his upcoming mini workshop with us on May 21st, but I'll put it again in the chat. Also, June has started to do a little intro series with us. We're one lesson in so far, but if you, and it's for beginners, I should say that before I get started. If you wanted to join, you can still purchase upcoming lessons individually. So I'll put a link for that as well. It's not necessarily doing the figure, it's just kind of like an all-around beginner's intro course. So you can kind of look through the lessons and see which ones would be applicable to you. So here's a link for the individual course. They're $10 each.
Yeah, I would say definitely for that course, that is called literally Watercolor and Introduction. So it's about, just if you're wondering how to mix paint, how to consider, like how to just do a wash, how also to layer, thinking about layering and glazing. And so by the end, we will go to a point where we'll be doing more like way more complex paintings, like landscapes and so on. But it sort of like incorporates all of the watercolor techniques, foundational techniques.
Mm-hmm. I also just put a survey down there. If you guys wouldn't mind filling that out, it just helps us with future demos and whatnot. If you guys have any advice for how we can make things better in the future, you can fill that out. It's just a little multiple choice and a comment section at the bottom. It takes less than 2 minutes to do. Or if you think that we did a great job and we don't need to improve on anything, you can go ahead and put that as well. We're totally okay with that. Thank you so much. Again, my name was Brittany and I was your host today. Thank you, June. It was lovely to be here with you again.
Thank you, Brittany. And thanks to everybody who joined, who are around out there. Be safe, everybody.
Yeah, be safe. Don't forget to tag us if you followed along today with hashtag #EtcherStudio, and you'll be entered in our weekly draw to win a random prize from us. Thanks again, guys, and we'll see you soon. Have a great day. Bye.
Bye. Take care. Bye-bye.
All right, sweet.